So welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for Gwinnett County Public Library's bi-monthly Social Justice Club. This is our second session. My name is Linda Huang and I am a librarian at the Five Forks branch. Today we will be discussing Asian and Pacific Islander American issues by discussing Ellen McGirt and David C. Morris's Fortune.com article, Hate Crimes Against Asian Americans Are Nothing New. Ellen McGirt is an award-winning feature writer focusing on race, culture, and leadership for Fortune. David Z. Morris is a technology contributor to Fortune. My tech assistant, Manor, will be linking the article as well as the discussion questions in the chat. So you can open the chat by clicking on the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. If you need any help, just ask and we'll try to figure it out. So once you click on that, it will open a sidebar to the right of the video where you can see the chat. I ask that you please mute your microphones until you're ready to speak, and you can do that by clicking on the microphone audio icon at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. If you'd prefer to enter your responses into the chat box, you may do that as well, and I will read them out loud. Manor, please help me keep up with the chat. I may not see it right away. Just a couple of notes. As librarians, we are information specialists, and we're here to simply bring you information and not persuade you of anything. Please be respectful to others. In addition, I want to welcome all perspectives and would like everyone to contribute if they are comfortable doing so. We may have some uncomfortable silences, but I would like to give everyone the opportunity to share their thoughts freely, and I will do my best to keep my own contributions to a minimum. So we'll get started with a very basic question. So for those of you who read the article, what were your general thoughts about it? I will say something about this. So there's an article, Manor, if you'd like to link that, I think it's the AJC one, or no, it's the NPR one. It says, after Ahmaud Arbery's killing, Georgia governor signs hate crimes legislation, and that was very recently, as you know, in 2020. So Georgia did not have any hate crime legislation or language to tack on any additional sentences or anything like that to any crime that can be considered a hate crime. How would you all define a hate crime? I think that's something basic that we need to address first.
I will. I guess to me, a hate crime is when somebody commits a crime against someone else based on their race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation.
Thank you, Miriam. How do we prove that? How, is it black and white usually when we see these cases?
So we had Nick in the chat who basically said the same thing as Miriam. He would also define a hate crime that's committed towards a person based mostly off their race, sexuality, religion, etc.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Manor. I think we were just one of 4 states, according to the article, that did not have a hate crime law until 2020. They tried to pass one back in 2004, but they found the written law to be too vague. There is, I think it's the justice.gov that Manor posted in the chat. It says that the term hate can be misleading when used in a hate crime law. The word hate does not mean rage, anger, or general dislike. In this context, hate means bias against people or groups with specific characteristics that are defined by the law. Federal level hate crime laws include crimes committed on the basis of the victim's perceived or actual race, just like you said, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. Most state crime laws include crimes committed on the basis of race, color, and religion. Many also include crimes committed on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. The good thing about the justice.gov website is they give you a lot of different scenarios of what could be actually considered a hate crime. In reading more about hate crime legislation, I think they said that California has the most robust hate crime laws. However, it's often not prosecuted and it's not kept up with down the line. So we don't know how often hate crimes are actually prosecuted, which is another issue. Just because you have the legislation doesn't mean it's actually doing anything in the end. So that's definitely something that I believe attention needs to be drawn to.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, but I think in that same article, it was saying in California, there was like 1,000 cases or something like that, but only like 60 or 70 convictions, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so the proportions are not great either.
Right.
Even if they do have a hate crime bill. So that's kind of disappointing.
It is. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anybody else want to comment on hate crime?
I think that maybe has something to do with this, but there has been some conversation or on the news about how the Asian community has been reluctant to say what's going on or to report all these crimes out of, I don't know, being ashamed or being afraid. Usually what happens with minority groups, and that's probably we see low reports, the low number on reports, and also the low number on cases being prosecuted, actually.
Yeah, you make a great point, Lennon. Again, some of these individuals may be immigrants. This is kind of like what we talked about in our last session. They may not be comfortable, reporting to the authorities because they don't want to get sent back. There's, a whole slew of reasons why they wouldn't want to do that. And unfortunately, I'm sure a lot goes unreported. So yeah, thank you for that. Okay, Minora went ahead and posted the big question here. So I feel like that we have to discuss the recent Atlanta shootings, the small shootings as they're often referred to, that happened in March. There's a lot of debate as to whether the crime was committed due to a sex addiction on the part of the offender or due to racist ideologies. What are your thoughts? What are your beliefs? And do you feel like the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive?
I think that when I heard about the police officer, uh, saying that the person responsible for the shooting was having a bad day and that's why he acted the way that he acted, or that this was supposedly or might be due to a sexual addiction. It just reminded me of the article from, I think it's the New York Times magazine, about the doctor who was punched and during a flight, and how the victim ends up being somehow responsible for the crime that was committed to the person. In this case, this shouldn't occur because of a sexual addiction that now it's turning into maybe implying that the women are responsible for his addiction. It just, to me, it was just not right, just coming out and saying that. But that's the way that I saw it.
Thank you, Lennon. Would anybody like to respond to Lennon?
I think there's a lot to unpack in that situation. And like Lennon mentioned, the police chief said he was having a bad day, and it already seemed like he was getting defended before anything even happened. And I know those types of briefings, you should probably be more careful with your word choice. But the fact that he explicitly said, oh, he's just having a bad day, so that's why he went and shot up a spa, because that's not what people do when they have a bad day. You might cry or something, or like, I don't know, go get something to make you feel better, not murder 8 people who were mostly women of color. And to have him be basically defended in the press briefing like the day that it happened is also really hurtful, because they would rather defend someone who's committing the crime than the people who were the collateral damage in it. And I think it was not right for the shooter to blame it on his addiction. He could have sought out medical professional help for that. And that shouldn't mean that you go shoot up a spa where mostly Asian women work. And then that also ties into the fact of Asian women being fetishized in Western media, and those types and spas being associated in media and depicted as places where they're like sex parlors or whatever you want to call them. So I feel like all of that kind of rolled into one. It obviously seems like a hate crime to me. And I'm sure the rest of the people here would agree with me. I just think that it sucks that the police chief guy went ahead and defended him almost immediately, like the day it happened.
Before I say anything, would anyone else like to hop in? I'm trying really hard not to say anything, but oh, here we go. Looks like Sydney says it's hard not to relate his motive to racial ideologies when the majority of deaths were Asian lives. It becomes more than coincidence when he goes to more than one spa. I agree. There's also evidence that he was going to go to Florida and continue this spree, which is terrifying to think about. And, I am biased. I would consider myself an Asian American. And and as an Asian American woman, like you were both saying, it seems to be a lot of victim blaming. I've heard the argument from acquaintances that, well, where else was he going to go for sex? And that's really offensive on a lot of levels. Like you said, the fetishization of Asian women is, very prevalent in society. And in our society in particular, Asian women are seen as submissive, as mail order brides, things like that. And the idea of the happy ending is something that a lot of people are familiar with. That's a pretty common idea. There's no evidence that there was any kind of sexual relations going on at these spas, and to assume that, and even if there was, kind of looking at the immorality of sex work and tying that into everything, it doesn't matter. What it comes down to is he killed people. He killed people at these particular shops, these spas, where it was primarily Asian women that worked there, Asian immigrants. There's a whole lot, like you said, to unpack, and it is really hard to look past that. So personally, I do get upset when people say it has nothing to do with race. Sure, it can have a lot to do with multiple things, but I don't think you can exclude race from the equation. Anybody else on that? Because I feel like this is like the big question, and this is something that we wanted to have this discussion before the shootings even occurred. So definitely something I feel like we really, really need to delve into.
I mean, again, all of this seems like it revolves onto shifting the blame from the white guy to the victim. So it's hard not to say that it wasn't racially motivated.
Kind of parallels in regards to our last discussion of the idea of defund the police, again blaming the victim, kind of like, well, this is his arrest record, or this is what he did in his past, and it doesn't matter. He's still a victim. We've all been through something. This has no relevance onto what happened to him in the end. No one deserves to die in that manner.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to comment on the shootings here in Atlanta. I mean, how crazy that it happened here so close to home. I was shocked. I was angry, and I was fearful, because sometimes those kind of events kind of incite more violence from people. Is it racially motivated, especially with the suspect saying that, no, it had nothing to do with that. It was a sexual addiction. But again, to me, there is that underlying racial motivation, because it's the racial stereotype of Asian women, the fetishization of Asian women. Although, it's not going to be easy to prove that it was racially motivated, it's hard not to think that, especially with what's going on right now in the Asian American community here in America, with all the violence, the things that were covered in the article here in Atlanta. That was it coming to a head. Many people lost their lives. Yeah, it's hard to say, is it really truly racially motivated? But it's also, we can't disprove it, but we can't prove it. It's very unfortunate, and it's hard to feel safe.
Agreed. Thank you, Marianne. Along those lines, the next question I just had to put in there. Did anyone see the video of the 65-year-old Filipino woman in New York City? They captured on video. She was assaulted by a much larger man. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? I had to put that in there because I was greatly affected.
That made me mad. She's 65 years old. She doesn't deserve that. No one does. But yeah, it makes me think of like my grandparents. What if that happened to them? I mean, it's just senseless violence. It really is. And it's scary. It's scary. It kind of reminds me of, there were viral videos too, like last year, of like food vendors in different cities getting like punched in the face or getting robbed, or both. And they're older too, and they're immigrants, and they're just trying to make an honest living. And this woman, I think she was just walking, So it's, I don't know, just senseless.
And I think that this takes us to the comment of whoever was nearby and didn't do anything, just being a bystander.
Yeah, I think that was just the cherry on the top for me when I saw that they decided to just close the door and call for help instead of actively going in there. I hate to make assumptions, but these did look like men that could take on another man. I understand, maybe you're afraid, you don't want to intervene in the situation, but I feel like there's something that you can do. And I know that I saw that there's various types of training online on how to intervene in those situations without physically putting yourself in harm's way. And I think we could all learn from that. We could all, educate ourselves regarding that. But I personally don't know. Like, if I was there, I would have to jump in. I would have to do something, have to say something, because it's pretty it's pretty devastating to me. And like Miriam was saying, she thought about her grandparents. If that was my grandmother, if that was my mother, it's just they seem to pick the most vulnerable people to go after, and it's usually elderly. And it's just sad. They're taking out their frustration with COVID-19 and what they're unable to do in society on people, assuming that Asians are one big monolith of people, first of all, that we're all Chinese, Chinese or Japanese, no others exist. But also just, a lot of people not eating at Chinese restaurants because they feel like they're going to get COVID because the people there are Chinese. It makes no sense. It's just an ignorant way of thinking.
We have some chat comments. I can read them for you, Linda. Ashley said, I saw the headline but didn't watch the video. As Miriam mentioned, this isn't the first time something like this has happened recently to older people in the Asian community, and it's really sad that it's happening again. And Sydney said, it was disheartening to see no one help her. As Miriam said, it was senseless violence.
Thank you, Manor. Yeah, I appreciate Ashley and Sydney's contribution. I'll just say it's a sad affair, but going along with that, the next question, let's compare and contrast the last presidential administration with the current. How do you think the change in tone in response to anti-Asian attacks by the new administration will impact anti-Asian hate crimes or not? And recently, it was yesterday that CNN posted, it says Senate advances bill to combat surge of anti-Asian hate crimes. Does anyone have anything to say on that matter?
I think that we can all see the difference, at least slightly, in the tone, not calling people names, not calling COVID-19 other names other than what it is, COVID-19, and not always finding a group of people to all the wrong things that are happening, unfortunately, due to COVID-19 in our society. I think we can all see the difference in that way. But again, I think that for us to be able to see major changes is going to take a while, because, unfortunately, it was 4 years that we kept hearing all these names and blaming other people for whatever was wrong here in the US. So it's going to take a little while to see blame some major changes, like I said.
I have seen, with everything going on with Black Lives Matter and all of the recent police shootings, I've seen people bring up the question, they're talking about voting on anti-Asian hate crime legislation, but is there anything in regards to, Black lives and Hispanic lives, other lives as well? That kind of, we can come back to this question, but that kind of brings me to the next point where we talk about the idea of the model minority when referring to Asian Americans. How might this affect how particular segments of the Asian American community are treated, and how might this affect other minorities or people of color? I've read a lot about this. It's very interesting, but is anyone else familiar with the model minority concept and if they have anything to say on that, I'd love to hear it.
I can weigh in on here since I am also Asian. And it's a little bit of a different experience for me in terms of the model minority myth, too, because even when I was growing up, a lot of people basically assumed me as sort of racially ambiguous because I don't look Asian or Pakistani or whatever you want to call it. And a lot of people would mistake me for being Latina. So a lot of people would start speaking to me in Spanish and all that kind of stuff. And growing up, I never really thought the model minority myth was applicable to me because people didn't really know I was Asian until they specifically asked or anything like that. And just up until recently, I was talking to my cousin about it, I think about this time last year, about how I didn't think that it related to me because no one really ever knows that I'm Asian, so they can't really project those stereotypes on me. But, she was like, you still can relate to it somehow, even if it's a little bit. It's weird. And I always thought it was geared more towards like East Asian people, not South Asian people, because of the fact that I never really had that experience. And I think it's weird to put a certain group of people on a pedestal because they're like smart or statistically more successful or whatever it is that they want to say that Asians are. It's like we're just normal people, just like everybody else, just doing what we can to get by. And it seems strange to kind of, I don't know, literally make us the model minority. Like anybody can be great. It doesn't matter if you're a minority or not, or if you're a particular minority or not. And I think that also because they're looked at sort of a higher level, all the other minorities and everyone else kind of gets put down because of the fact that Asians are so highly regarded in that sense. And it's unfair, of course, 100%. And I think it makes it harder for other minorities to get to where people think that Asians are because of the model minority myth. Hopefully all of that made sense.
Made complete sense to me. Thank you.
I was just going to add that this projection or idea that we have of the model minority, I feel sometimes that it's also a way to put a group minority against another group minority, even though in that small group minority, let's say the Asian American, there are different types of social status or social classes, different needs for that minority. And people are only seeing the professionals or the people who make it to the top, but they are not hearing or learning about the Asian Americans who are also struggling to make it during the day, to eat, to pay rent, And so, like I said a little while ago, having that ideology of Asians being the smartest or the professionals probably puts them against the other minorities who are also trying to struggle to make it to that top. So it puts us against each other in a way, and that way it's easier probably for that 1% to stay in power in a way. Like I said, I don't know if that makes some sense.
Again, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think the last article that Manor linked is for a Time article called Asian Americans Are Still Caught in the Trap of the Model Minority Stereotype, and it creates inequality for all. They reference the incident, the death of George Floyd, and how one of the officers, Tu Tao, he was a Hmong, which is a minority in Vietnam. That's how he identified, and he stood by and did nothing in the situation. And the idea of the model minority, along with other concepts, are dividing people who should be working together. I know there's a lot of division between Asian Americans, African Americans. Unfortunately, that's the reality a lot of the time, but I think we need to work together to improve. It's just worsening the divide. And I think it's going to take a lot of work. People come from all different cultures, So in speaking of Asian Americans, first generation immigrants and their families, they come from all different walks of life. They come from different classes. There's the intersection of class, race, sex, all sorts of different things that make up a person's identity and makes them a complex human being. But people tend to, once again, Asians are just this one group of people. But like Minora was saying, she's Asian. She talks about Pakistani. There's Indian. There's Mongolian. There's Vietnamese. There's Pacific Islanders. All sorts of people with a lot of different culture, rich cultures, diverse cultures, and ignoring that's how you make Asian Americans the other. How you separate them from the rest of society. It's how Black Americans, they've kind of been grouped into one thing. Their histories are rich and diverse as well, but unfortunately, because of the history of slavery in America, they've kind of lost that identity. They're trying to bring that back. There's so much that needs to be considered when you're talking about someone else. You don't really know a person until you talk to that person individually. You don't know their individuality. You don't know their past traumas. You don't know what they've been through. And we need to take a different approach in this country if we're going to get anywhere. And that's what I feel. Once again, I'm rambling. I don't know if I'm making any sense. If anybody else wants to comment on that.
First of all, you made perfect sense. And I think you're right. It's going to take a lot of work to get to a better place. And because we have these institutions set up from hundreds of years ago, and it can't be dismantled overnight, unfortunately. That would be awesome. Or if they had like a For Dummies book about this, that'd be great also. And it sucks to see, like you mentioned, the Asian community and the Black community being pitted against each other. And there's already so much hatred in between those two groups as well. And I've seen it for myself. I know people who have said certain sentiments, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I guess that's probably just white supremacy doing its thing. Yeah, I think it all just kind of comes back to the foundations of this country, of like the world, like colonialization and everything, you know what I mean? It all kind of can be found at sort of an epicenter, and there's like a common denominator there. And I think if that hadn't happened at the beginning of the universe, that maybe the world would be in a better place. And we can play what ifs all day, but it just is up to us to actually do the work and find people that represent us and put them into office, get them to do what we want because we're their constituents, you know what I mean? And it's going to be a very slow going process, especially because we have so many older folks in our government and things like that who may or may not be stuck to their old ways and don't want to see the world outside of their safe bubble. And I think that's selfish because there's more to the world than your bubble. And to not recognize that is just the utmost disrespect, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
I was just going to say that if there's any little positivity here during the protests for Black Lives Matter or the protests or marches that have been going on against Asian American hate crimes. From what I've seen on the news, I think there has been a little bit more of support from different groups, Latinos and Black Americans, supporting each other's community. I think that hopefully we will keep doing that and support each other.
Thank you for the optimism, Lennon. We definitely could use that. I do have hope for the future. I feel like the younger generation in particular, and some of the older generation too, of course, but I feel like there's been, like, the younger generation seems more outspoken. They're able to get their ideas out there through social media. They have that platform where anyone can say what they want and, bring light to these issues. And that's very powerful. We didn't have that in the past. We had limitations based on space and time, but now, we can do these webinars. Anyone could attend. People can post to places like TikTok. I know Lenore loves TikTok, but that is actually like a really good platform.
It is really like, it genuinely surprised me the capabilities that TikTok had, because when I first downloaded it at the beginning of the pandemic last year, I was like, oh, this is like whatever, okay, it's fine. It'll just, kill some time, whatever, because every day was so mundane and so the same. And then, once your algorithm kind of catches up to what you're liking and what you want to actually see, it is actually a really great and really fast source to get information. And it's not always correct information, but information, or at least awareness about certain topics, depending on your algorithm, of course. And I feel like mine particularly is a really good mix of like social justice issues, funny stuff, but a lot of people of color creators too, which is important to me personally, because I want to see them be lifted up, because TikTok does have a bias towards white creators, and they tend to suppress people of color on the app as well. And not to say that it doesn't happen to those white creators either, but like those are the ones you're hearing about on the news. Those are the ones you're hearing about on like Jimmy Fallon or whatever. And those are the people that get called, you know what I mean? And not the people of color creators that are on the app doing good. They're doing really good work on there, honestly. And it's almost like a weird news source for me. At least I know quickly, like, okay, this thing happened. I'll know that I need to look into that later, and then go, fact check what I read, because that's also important. You can't take everything on the internet seriously. And then sometimes there are just like funny political memes on there, and it's a good laugh, so it's like it has everything on there that I personally would like to see. And it's a really good tool for the younger generation to weaponize in that way for a good cause. You know what I mean?
My attention span is very short, so I think it is a great source of information. But like you said, you need to do the research and go into it and make sure that what you're hearing is true. But same thing with Wikipedia. But honestly, yeah, these platforms, sadly, like you said, the white creators are the ones that get the most hype, they get the most attention. But hopefully over time these diverse voices will be in the forefront. See, Ashley made a comment, it's also very similar on YouTube. The white content creators usually get more views than the creators of color who put in the same amount of time and energy and then some on their videos. That's absolutely true. I watch a lot of YouTube, and unfortunately they do get buried. And but thankfully, if you do try to seek out those diverse voices, usually you'll get recommendations for additional diverse voices. But you do have to make that effort instead of it just popping up like a white creator would. But hopefully, I'm trying to remain optimistic that we're just going to continue, as our country becomes more and more diverse, that those voices will be heard. And particularly in Gwinnett County, we're so diverse. I feel like a lot of amazing things are coming out of Gwinnett County, and I do have hope for the future, and I hope good change is enacted. At least in our opinion, good change is enacted. So I want to sincerely thank everyone who did contribute today. So yeah, if you enjoyed today's session, our next session is on June 17th, same day of the week, Thursday at 6:30 p.m. And we're actually going to have U.S. Representative Carolyn Bordeaux. She's going to come speak on the healthcare gap in the United States. Registration is required, and you can go to our website, which is gwinnettpl.org, and register there, or you can call us and we can set you up. The link will be up soon to register. We're very, very excited about having her, and I hope that everyone can attend. All right, guys. Well, thank you. And I hope you all have a good evening.